Hey, Michael. Nice to see you. How are you doing today?
Stephen, it's been a hot minute since we had dinner here in Toronto. What was that, 5 years ago now?
That's what it feels like in the AI era. Well, hey, you are leading some engineering teams over at Gorgias, but you've been involved in engineering leadership for quite the career. You've worked at a mix of more established companies and a lot of startups along the way. Um, how did you end up at Gorgias? Like, what brought you into the role that you're working on now?
It's an interesting one, and I think very much sort of an outcome of the times where the sort of engineering career progression for the first, I don't know, 20 years, 25 years of my career was pretty linear. You're an IC, right? You get very good at your craft. At some point, you try to become like that T-shaped engineer where you're broad and deep and you sort of know stuff. At some point, probably in 2014, 2015, I was like, the problems that I'm trying to solve are not just technical problems, they're also people problems, right? There's like a system that everything operates within. And that was the sort of transition to more of a leadership role. Went from principal engineer to director, VP, ran an entire engineering org. And one of the sort of realizations I had maybe 5 years ago was I feel I kept inheriting other people's engineering orgs, and trying to change cultures is kind of like turning a tankard. It'll take years to change a culture. I was like, I want to do this from the ground up. So I joined, a much smaller startup and went through that journey, and found that the sweet spot for me has been around, an engineering team of 100, people. Somewhere in there is where my skills uh, really land and help scale up. And then, had the opportunity to join Gorgias, which was the sort of startup within the scale up, where there's an established organization here. We've been building, a help desk, which then became more of a conversational commerce platform. And there was an opportunity to build a marketing platform, which was something I've always wanted to do. And I was given the opportunity to focus on building a product, from zero, building the team, building the culture, but doing it with the support of an organization instead of trying to, frantically find PMF before the money runs out. And doing that while we're also in the midst of this transition, to AI, not just, using AI, but also building products that are AI. So it all just came together quite nicely.
Great. I love that. Having the resources of a broader parent company, but the autonomy to execute quickly on a new product sounds kind of like the best of both worlds. Given that you've seen this longitudinal study of engineering leadership and the people problems, the organizational problems, the technical problems, right now it feels like a really dynamic time to be leading a team and leading software engineers because there are so many questions about the shape of the role and how the role is evolving and um, what it means to be an engineer in 2026 and 2027 and what kind of skills are important. As you've taken on this role and you've been guiding the team through all of those questions, what are some of the things that just feel tried and true, good old fashioned engineering leadership from the past decades, and what feels new and novel to you that you're figuring out with your team?
Every day is a new day is definitely the mental model here. I think as we have gone through like the vibe coding sort of extravaganza, where it was just like, let AI loose, it'll do stuff for you. Do it turns out prompts matter, garbage in, garbage out, to harness engineering, all that sort of stuff. I think as we go through that evolution, we realize that a lot of the software engineering fundamentals still apply. If we go back a long time ago, there was like the waterfall process where you tried to define upfront, what is this thing supposed to do? And you have to be very prescriptive. You have these, 250-page docs with, very granular detail. And we've sort of ended up going back to that in essence, where for an AI to do things to the level that we feel the right qualities are, we're doing that. But at the same time, there's a completely new area of just experimentation and exploration where, as engineers, we also need to be very close to to our customers. And I'd say Gorgias has always embodied that. One of our things is that, every employee is also a CSM. We have to manage, a relationship with a merchant to sort of stay close to them. Now we
Oh,
can be a
that's cool. Your
CSM. Yeah.
engineers too are
Yeah.
kind of
Oh,
CS. That's cool.
yeah. But now we also get to be a PM and a CSM, where we can have ideas and mock something up and bring it straight to a customer and be like, "Hey, we're thinking about this. Does this resonate? What do you think?" So in that sense, there's still a lot of like deep architecture that is still critically important. To get the right quality out, to be able to have something scale, you still have to think deeply about that. You don't worry about maybe the code quite so much, and I'm sure there's going to be some challenges in the coming, months to years as some of those quality decisions that we've kind of pretended will not be there will pop up and we'll have to deal with. I think that's still going to be something we'll deal with, but from the experimentation side, yeah, so much fun.
You said before we hopped on this call, you're using a lot of AI to build an AI product. Before we talk about how you're using AI and get into that, maybe tell us a little bit about what your team is building. Um, and I'm sure that's moving very quickly too, with the model capabilities evolving and the market around AI driven, AI supported, customer conversation is moving quickly too. So just yeah, curious about some of the innovation there that you're doing for your customers.
Sure. I appreciate the ability to plug Gorgias a little bit here. So as I mentioned, we started as like that help desk. When a support agent has to connect to a human, we built that platform. Over time, it evolved into the little chat bubble that'll pop up on a website where you're like, I don't want to email somebody. I want support now. And then obviously in the last 3 years, we're like, why wait for a human? That doesn't scale quite linearly. You need to find the people. You have to be online. AI can solve a solid 80, 90% of this. Obviously, we want to get that number higher. So we started doing that and really driving deeply. And we've iterated on our own sort of AI agentic architecture. We're now up to like version 3 of this. And so Gorgias as a whole, that's where we've been focused. My team is more focused on the customer engagement side of things. And if we look at a lot of the email service providers or marketing tools in the world, while they're starting to integrate AI, it's more in the we will generate the template, the content for you, but it'll be the same content. Everybody gets that. And from our perspective, we know that conversational commerce has much better ROI, but we also know that hyper personalization at the right time drives better ROI. So given all the context we have about the shopper, the actions, what they're doing, what they like, how do we weave all of that in and create that hyper personalized messaging? And then if they have questions, we can just keep the conversation going and really, drive that engagement forward. And so for us, being able to unlock a whole new market has been pretty awesome.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, let's get into how your team's using AI to build. At the dinner that we were both at, you told me some of the cool things that you're doing to agentify the whole process, going from spec into working software. How did you get there? Like, and what's the current status? What's working? What's not working? As you've been pushing the team to reimagine the way of working and bringing software to life.
So I think we're on the same journey that most companies are on. We might be a little bit further ahead in some regards. I think our team is also a little bit faster and easier because we don't have a lot of legacy that we need to bring along. One of the challenges that I think everybody in the industry is acknowledging is that like a brownfield project, trying to have AI work on it comes with a lot more overhead because there's context, there's the system architecture, there's all the interactions. So we didn't have to start with that, which made it a little bit easier for us to get up and going. And I think we started the same place everybody does, trying to map out the system. What are the things that we do? Where do we spend a lot of time? What feels like not good use of time? If I could automate something, what would that be? And I think we did what everybody did, which was like, oh, write my unit tests. Just I don't want to deal with that. Like, I want to write the cool stuff. You write the not cool stuff. And then slowly learning that, wait, if it doesn't understand the code, it can't write the right tests. If it doesn't understand the business problem we're trying to solve, is it writing tests that are valuable at all? So again, when you mentioned earlier some of the tried and true things, it started with like test driven design, build the test, then build the software, use like the spec up front to define that. And so we basically started building those skills that would take an idea and turn it into, like a product design document, turn that into, a linear project and start breaking it down. Very human in the loop though, right? We had to drive all of that stuff at every different step. Um, Part of it was because the models weren't quite there yet. Part of it was trust wasn't there yet. And part of it was we didn't really know what the right guardrails were to make that work correctly.
Makes sense. How has that trust grown over time? Are you finding that there are opportunities to use the latest and greatest models for more of this?
So I think part of it has been um, more around like the harness itself, where instead of just building discrete skills, which are just words, and as we all know, words can be ignored or misunderstood or misinterpreted. And so we started building actual plugins that used, deterministic hooks, forcing certain schemas, certain approaches. That meant that when you triggered, a specific workflow, it was basically kept on the rails, where it was very specific boundaries of what we were trying to do. It's a very granular thing. A skill does a specific unit of work and it sort of moves along. We have like judges in there all the way across, and it has made it easier for us to check in periodically, to validate the outcome and say, yeah, that matches the understanding, and for it to escalate when something goes wrong. Because one of the biggest challenges with LLMs is when they're convinced of something, they will just keep running with it. And putting those deterministic checks in place just keeps it from sort of spinning out of control. So in that sense, I'd say that uh, the harness has been a sort of a big unlock. And I think the other one, and this was something that one of the team members here, Jan, started, was a little agent called Maya. And Maya is uh, that thing that you use to take a PR, sorry, like a linear ticket and turn it into a PR. But it intentionally starts on small units of work. So as an engineer, I can be like, we need to move this 5 pixels over, or, all these little things are just nits.
Small
Uh,
cosmetic thing. Yeah.
or, a test is flaking, right?
Hmm.
This happens a lot. Nobody wants to go investigate it. And by having these small granular things, we can build trust and validate that, it works as expected, that the outcome is there. So I think for us, it's just being uh, sort of engineering minded about it. Have an idea, have an hypothesis, implement it, validate it quickly. Does it work? Yes. And that's sort of continue building on top.
I heard a good definition of hardness recently, which is a set of deterministic software that wraps a probabilistic model. And I really like it because these models, like you said, they can start making stuff up or go down a bad path. And if you rerun them with the same input conditions, sometimes you'll get different outcomes. So the harness, like the plugins, the tests, the scaffold kind of constrains it and gives you confidence that ultimately where it lands is going to be pretty good. And if it's not good, then hopefully you find a way to improve your harness and make it better. I'm curious because it sounds like you're investing a lot in your harness, what that practice looks like. I've sort of heard people start to call it meta engineering, where you're engineering the factory that then the factory ultimately produces the work. You're building the system that builds the system. It sounds like you are developing shared skills, developing plugins. What does that collaboration look like in practice with your team for people to improve the harness and make stuff better?
One of the sort of early learnings that we had was that just by making a central repository for skills doesn't allow sort of communal learning. And I think one of the challenges is that it's still very engineering centric. My partner, she works for legal tech. They're deep into this as well. She works on the R&D ops side, and she's like, we have Claude, and we have five PMs that all have created like variations of a PM skill. How do we collaborate on that stuff, and how do we figure out what we should sort of cherry pick from each and smash together into like our canonical PM skill? And it's like, well, have you heard of GitHub? And instantly it's like, uh, I can't ask PMs to like open PRs. It's like, well, you can ask Claude to do it, but it becomes such a pain. So trying to bake some of that functionality, directly into the tool itself, so that the people can be abstracted away from some of the technical stuff. I think that is one huge part of it. And the other, for engineers, because we do tend to live in GitHub, that's fine, is by making it a plugin repo, we also build skills to sort of reinforce the learnings. Because as you execute the plugin, things will go wrong. That's fine.
Hmm.
How do we extract that and say, okay, what was the root cause of this? Now go update the plugin and sort of update your context and memory so that we don't have this sort of thing happen over again. And now it's distributed and shared, and everybody just keeps layering on top. It doesn't solve just your problem; it solved it for everybody.
Makes sense. Yeah, I've sometimes heard people call these kind of golden paths, canonical paths. You allow some amount of localized differences in workflow and setup because people want to have their autonomy for how they work. But then where are those centralized investments where some learning, some reusable path, we share those things so that we all kind of get increased leverage out of this system. So that, yeah, that's cool to hear. Like folks are actively collaborating and doing that. The other part of the conversation that we've been hearing a lot about is cost. Yeah, folks are starting to use AI in all the places. It's definitely making us faster, but token bills are starting to add up. Is that a concern for you? Like, how are you thinking about cost management, efficiency? Is it an active priority, or is it something on the back burner for now?
It is very interesting where I think as an industry, we all know this, and I think we're all on sort of different journeys where there are different time horizons. So a lot of folks on GitHub got sort of the early surprise about token costs. I just got the email from Atlassian that their AI stuff is moving to usage based, I think, in a week or two. Um, our Anthropic contract is going to renew, I think, in late July. It'll move from our wonderful subscription to usage based. We know it's coming, but we don't know what it looks like yet. Um, and so for us, it's hard to sort of start making some of those judgments. I've heard a lot of people, oh, we budgeted like 1,000 per person. We budgeted, you know, this per person. Then you have like ramp that's like, oh, why would we budget? Like, yeah, it unlocks everybody. And so I don't think there's a singular answer. I think it's sort of contextual to the business, how they're doing. I think if you're on a huge growth curve, like any startup, you could paper some of that over, or fresh funding sort of makes it go away. If you're a bit more of a mature organization, public company, it gets a little bit harder. So in that sense, I think it's situational. It is top of mind. As our team, I would say, is a very strong user of AI because we're very experimental. We're trying to figure out what resonates, with merchants. How do we get things in front of them? We have to ingest, hundreds of millions of events, feed them through ML pipelines, all that sort of stuff. We're building a lot. And for us, it's been a multiplier to get things there faster. So it's like, yeah, I know that we're expensive. I mean, I can fire up some tools to estimate my usage, and I see some numbers that are, that ain't cheap. Can I argue for the ROI? Is I think the biggest question that we're trying to answer.
Right, right. Yeah, if I remember correctly, you're using AI yourself a ton, right? What are you doing with it, leading the organization?
It's interesting, and I think this is going back to why I joined Gorgias. A lot of it was was to be in this position where I could experiment more, be a little bit more hands-on, just less focused on, the people and systems and more about like the product and the engineering. So in that sense, I am very hands-on. I'm building the harness with the team specifically so that I can keep using it and sort of keep the things going. One of the interesting challenges that I've had to address is that a lot of my team is globally distributed, and I don't want to wait for tomorrow. I don't want to wait for reviews. I don't want to wait for help. So Claude can reach into the code base, help me understand, share context, all that sort of stuff. So we can basically keep the builds going. Do a handover. So it just goes on. Um, but I think the better part for me is when I talk to merchants, being able to just come here with like a demo.
Hmm.
And so I was talking to one of our merchants today about the autonomous customer engagement platform that we're envisioning, and having with Claude being able to reach in through our AI agent running on top of all of our data to pull out some context and be like, so this is how we're thinking about your business, and these are the numbers we see, and this is how we want to build the product using real data that took like zero effort. I didn't have to go, bug data engineers and data scientists just to get that together and to get it in front of them. Like, wow, we've never thought of it that way, but that's where we want to go. And
Yeah.
being able to do that so quickly has been a game changer.
Yeah. I see this too with the blending of roles between engineering, product design. I think these tools help everybody feel a little more empowered to get to the 80%, maybe not to the 100%, right? Because there's a real craft to each of these functions. Building scalable architecture on the engineering side is very different than a prototype. Building a high fidelity design that considers accessibility and internationalization and all of these things is a very different skill than slapping a prototype together that you can get some feedback from a customer on. But it does kind of empower people to not wait for coordination, right? To just take that next step to build higher conviction, to then ultimately put it into something that you want to productionize at a high quality bar. So it's cool that it's doing that for you, right? Personally, you're able to generate quick prototypes to get feedback and have conversations about the direction that you want to head.
It does. I think the flip side is that it also highlights the systemic issues that predated AI, and these are engineering product design challenges that have always been there, where you have fixed capacity. Where do you want to invest the time? And we thought that code was the most expensive thing. So now AI writes our code, and it's like, okay, but now we spend a lot of time writing specs. And some engineers are like, I didn't come to write documentation, right? The craft was solving the problem, and it feels like I'm losing the fun part. Others like, I just love solving problems and seeing things land. So whatever, this is awesome. But the bottleneck now moves to like code reviews. And yes,
Hmm.
we're automating that stuff. And for like small slash low impact things, we'll let it slide. But what is a judge of what is a small low impact thing? Give you an example where we intentionally separate our database changes from our code changes so that we can, run the migration and then run the code on top of it. To the AI, it's a one file change. It looks very small and self-contained. So they're just like, thumbs up, ship it. And I was like, for the rest of it, it's like, whoa, wait. But like, I learned that this could lock in a table. And, if we're ingesting 500 million rows and I just locked a table, somebody's going to be very unhappy. So trying to tune, what is actually small versus what is not is one of the ongoing things. And then I feel pretty bad for PMs because, um, it used to be you could think sort of deeply about a product and go deep and spend a lot of time really figuring out like the surface area and the problem space. And I think now they just have to be spitting out so many ideas that I don't know if they're going to go as deeply as they used to be able to. And it's hard to tell if that truly impacts the roadmap in a positive way, the top line, all of that sort of stuff. So in that sense, I think we're still trying to tune what is the right way to use some of this stuff.
Some of I don't know if you follow the Linear CEO Kari. He's been talking a lot about just because you can build it doesn't mean you should. and kind of the craft, taste, judgment, product cohesion, all that stuff matters more than ever because you can just ship a lot of stuff, but does all the stuff kind of add up into it's like the whole being greater than the sum of the parts? And I think that relates to what you're talking about with the craft of PM, right? Where it's like, how do you curate and steward all of the different product components into one cohesive vision? It feels like it matters more than ever, but it's also harder than ever to do because everything is moving so fast. I'm curious on the people front. Like you talk about, like some engineers didn't think this was the job they were signing up for, right? Like I know some engineers personally who love getting into flow state and crafting code, and that was the joy of the role. It was fun to write code, and now we're saying, well, the code can be written by agents. Your job is to design the system, work on the harness, write the specifications. How are you navigating some of those kind of hard people changes? Because it is a big revamp of the role definition for a lot of folks.
I don't think there's a singular answer to this, and I think it works for different people, different teams. Part of it is also just leadership lessons. People are people. Everybody has a different sort of area of focus. Traditionally there was some person that if there's an on call, they will know exactly where to go in the system to fix it. You just know that they can tune things. There's other people that are great at shipping that very first product and sort of iterating really rapidly, but they're not good at the middle bit of like making it sort of scale. I don't think that has really changed. So trying to tailor the experience and find the thing that works for them is still key. I think the one thing that has changed is we can't not use AI in that sense. It feels like it's a tool. Why would you say no? Much like we used to have IDEs, and at some point we didn't. And when we started using IDEs, we're like, oh my God, like what a game changer. I hit play and it just runs like, wow, look at this. So in that sense, it's a tool similar to, I have a hammer, so everything's a nail. Is it always the right tool? Uh, we're still, I think, figuring some of that stuff out. Um, but in the general sense with people, it's about trying to understand, what brings them joy, and how do we just tune it so that they have that space to learn and grow. Um, I will say that I feel I'm very lucky that the team that I work with, everybody is always excited, not just to try, but to experiment, to learn, to iterate, and to provide feedback on what doesn't work, so that we don't have to keep like stumbling blindly through the maze, face first. So in that sense, I haven't run into the situation where somebody's being so reticent that they just utterly refuse because yeah, I don't think that would end particularly well.
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly the cultures that have collective learning and growth mindsets seem to be navigating this all a lot better because every day, like you said, it's a new day. There's new things to learn. We adapt and we evolve, which is fun. I wanted to ask you a question about code review. Um, it sounds like you're doing a lot to streamline, like trying to assess the riskiness of a change and fast path things that are lower risk. I imagine code review is a big bottleneck now, and a lot of your engineers are spending a lot more time reviewing work instead of creating work. Have you found anything that's worked well? Like what are the experiments that you're running that might be interesting to share with our audience?
So we're deeply invested in this because this is one of the biggest bottlenecks, and I think this applies to every organization. Um, One of the things that has worked well for us right now is um, using multiple models because they tend to pick on different things. Making sure that the code review is run in a completely fresh session, ideally not the person that actually wrote the code, very similar to how it used to be, or not the agent that wrote the code. We actually run a different set of reviewers that have different perspectives. There's the security reviewer, there's like an adversarial one, there's one that looks for database changes, all that sort of stuff. And we've tried to codify what this particular reviewer is looking for. Uh, it works very well. It can be very verbose. It's also very token heavy because many agents, all that sort of stuff. Um, so right now it's okay, but the question is, you know, when we start having to pay, like what happens then? So in that sense, I don't think that's going to be the final answer. The
And does
classification
all that
stuff,
stuff happen before it goes to a human? Like the reviewers will provide the feedback, the authorship agent will integrate the feedback, and it's not until that process completes that a human gets their eyes on it. So you're kind of shielding that human attention.
I don't know if shielding is the right word, but yes, that is the flow where the human is as sort of the final check at the end of the loop. I'll be honest, I'm again because we're a bit more of an experimental side. Quality is not my primary focus, so I'm more forgiving. If it breaks for some, for an alpha product, that's fine. We can fix it pretty quickly. So my bar is calibrated in a little bit of a different way to I'd say different parts of the organization. So for me, I'm okay with that. If I was at a different org or a different role, would that be the same thing? Probably not. I mean, if I look at the part of our system that ingests all of the webhooks from Shopify, that is an enormous event stream. Would I kind of YOLO things to prod, with no true human review? Probably not. And I think the other part that still consistently surprises me in a wonderful way is when somebody goes to review after the code reviewers and they ask that one thing, why would you do this? Don't you remember that the system 5 levels up behaves this way, and this contraindicates everything? And you're like, ooh, I didn't have that context. Claude didn't have that context, and
Right.
trying to map that out is almost impossible. So there's still incredible value.
Yeah, and what I hear in your answer there is kind of like a risk adjusted profile for um, what is the consequence of defects escaping in a given system and how quickly can you remediate those issues, defining kind of the level of heaviness that you need around the human review process and what you can streamline, what you can't. So adjusting for risk, which I really like. Michael, this has been a really fun conversation. If you look ahead at the next couple of months, I feel like the world will be totally different by the time we talk next. What are some of the primary challenges on the horizon that you're pushing your team to continue investing in, developing the harness, automating, streamlining code review? Like, where do you feel like you need to invest to stay ahead of that next chapter for where we're going?
That is the most incredibly insightful and challenging question I've been asked, I think, in a long time. I think part of it is we know something is going to happen in terms of token prices, and we know that our approach will be changing. We don't quite know how or to what. So coaching people to be just ready and okay that whatever we're doing today might not be the thing we're doing tomorrow, and that's fine, and we'll figure it out. We'll put an LLM gateway in place to start routing cheap things to the cheap model, the things that truly need deep thinking, to the expensive model, all that sort of stuff. We're going to do what everybody else is sort of doing in that sense, because we have to. I think the other two areas that are still incredibly important in terms of investment are like the platform engineering, the things that make the developer experience better, also ensure that the AI can validate things correctly. The biggest learning I'd say over the last year is that unit tests don't truly validate the functionality. Making sure that you can say write the playwright test to actually go to that page and click the button has uncovered more bugs than anything else. Or make sure you spin up the system, the end, the Microsoft, the whatever, and hit that endpoint, and make sure that you pass in green data, red data, and that it succeeds or fails correctly. That is critically important for like true validation of success. And then on the other side, it's somewhat tied to that harness perspective. That when we're thinking about meta engineering, it's how do you use AI to improve how you use AI? As models improve, as you learn, how do you encode that learning so that it just sticks? so you don't have to remember it because um, we drift just as much as AI does, um, while trying to manage token counts because that's going to be the ongoing challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a whole new game on the field. It's like how do you distill learning effectively into a memory layer that sits in your harness that governs the way that this agent produces code, but do that in a way where you're not bloating context windows, you're managing the memory state effectively. You've got the right deterministic tests around things so that you can be confident in reducing your human attention on code review. It's a lot of it is just good old-fashioned engineering. Like if you were operating an engineering team with thousands of engineers, you'd want a lot of guardrails and safety nets and things like that in the process. But it's almost like every company, even if you weren't at scale, is now needing to invest in this platform and foundation from day one. So it's a very interesting time. Michael, this has been really fun. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation today. And good luck with all those challenges that you're working on.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And the next time you're in town, I would like to catch up and hear what's new.